Live from the bridge at the Launchpad Studios in Huntington, New York, it's Sports Talk New York with your hosts, Mark Rosenman and AJ Carter. Sports Talk New York is sponsored in part by Cardboard Memories, Clearview, Long Island, the law firm of Decolator, Cohen, and DePrisco, the Phoenix Tube Company, PIMS Incorporated, fueling brand performance for 30 years, Prince Associates for all your insurance needs, and Soho Table Hockey. Here are your hosts, Mark and AJ.
And good Sunday evening to you. No, not Mark and AJ, Mark and Mike this Sunday evening. How you doing, Mike?
Doing great, Mark. How are you?
Good. Looking forward to a great show. And if you watch us each and every week, you know we started right off at the top with the Cardboard Memories Major League Baseball report with John Coppinger. It's sponsored by our friends over at Cardboard Memories, which is one of Long Island's most reputable memorabilia retail stores for over 29 years. The owner of Cardboard Memories, Scott Stamell, is known for his knowledge and savvy of authentic autographs. He's been featured on HBO Real Sports with Brian Gumbel. Cardboard Memories possesses the honesty, integrity one would want and need from a memorabilia source. Cardboard Memories is always buying collections large and small. Let Cardboard Memories run your next charity fundraising auction. Call them to find out how they can help your organization at no cost. Cardboard Memories is located at 6401 Jericho Turnpike in Comac, New York. Visit them on the web at cardboardmemories.com or follow them on Facebook or Instagram. How you doing, Johnny?
Doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. You know, it is November, but there's lots of baseball talk to be had. You know, we're heading into the free agency. Then we're heading into, is there going to be a lockout? Where are we going with this? So right off the bat, the New York Mets this week have offered their qualifying offers to Michael Conforto and Noah Syndergaard. And Pilar has also, declined his option, so he's a free agent. So those three, you take a look at the potential loss of Pilar, how do you replace him? And then you look at the two qualifying offers for Noah Syndergaard and Michael Conforto. What are the odds of either one or both or none of them accepting those qualifying offers?
Well, Syndergaard basically said that if he got offered the qualifying offer that he would come back. I would be very surprised. I would be shocked if Thor were to go elsewhere. Now, somebody might come along and blow him away with a deal he never thought he would get. But considering what Noah has said in public and on social media, I think he's coming back. Conforto's more of an interesting case. I think the prevailing thought is that he would decline the offer simply because Scott Boras is his agent. Now, a lot of people have said, well, he had a down year. It would make sense for him to take the qualifying offer, bet on himself, and do this again a year later. But remember, if Scott Boras didn't think he could get him, if he doesn't think he could get him that deal that he wants, then he would advise him to take that qualifying offer. And the one thing, when players hire Scott Boras, they don't hire Scott Boras to take qualifying offers. They go for that big payday. And if Boras still thinks that he can get Conforto that payday, they're going to go for it. And I think they're going to get it because Scott Boras always gets his contract almost without fail.
A couple of names that the Mets have always been linked to over the years are, the Chris Bryant. Obviously, last year we've heard a lot about that. And one of the guys that, when he was on the Pirates, the Mets were always talked about getting him, Starlin Marte. What are the chances of getting him? I mean, the bottom line is Marte, when he was with the A's, Marte basically, which I couldn't even believe. Mike and I were talking about this. There's only two center fielders in all of baseball that had a better WAR than him, and that's Mike Trout and George Springer. Met fans were clamoring for Springer, but you take a look at Marte, and he would be the perfect leadoff guy for the New York Mets. What do you think the chances of the Mets targeting him is?
I think if the Mets are smart, they target him for sure. Because like you said, there's only two center fielders with a higher WAR than him. And the knock on him really is, and nothing that's his fault, he's just a little older. I think he's going to enter his age 34 or 35 season coming up, but he's still putting up numbers. And considering the hole the Mets have had in center field the last few years, I think it would behoove them to go after him. Will they do it? I don't know, but I honestly think they should. I think Chris Bryant is a good target only because of his versatility. It'll keep the Mets versatile when it comes to bringing up prospects. They got Brett Beatty, who could play third base. They got Mark Vientos, who could play third and could play a little right field. So when these players are ready, you could always move Bryant around the diamond, and then you could do something else with Jeff McNeil and maybe he's the second baseman if Javi Baez goes somewhere else. If he stays here, then McNeil can go somewhere else. I think the versatility of Bryant works when you're talking about the players they have coming up. And Sandy Alderson has said, hey, we got to rely more on our farm system. So I wouldn't expect them to sacrifice a Beatty or a Vientos to bring in a free agent like say Carlos Correa, who's going to be anchored at third base for 10 years or 8 to 10 years if he were to sign with the Mets. That's why I think Bryant would be a better fit.
Now, you take a look at the New York Yankees, one of their glaring weaknesses, that everyone believes is shortstop position. And this year it is, if you need a shortstop, this is the year that you need a shortstop. Of all the possibilities that are out there, which is the shortstop the Yankees should target, in your opinion?
Oh, well, I personally am a fan of Corey Seager. I think he's been consistent. He's been hurt, but he's been consistent. He's done it in LA. You look at a guy like Carlos Correa, he's been hurt. You look at a guy like Trevor Story, he's played in Colorado. So you're really not 100% sure about those guys. Now, that said, Carlos Correa made a big deal about showing us on Instagram that he was in New York. So I do think that if the Yankees go back to their George Steinbrennerian ways of going after the big fish, I do think Correa could be a fit. And I could see that happening. I personally am a fan of Corey Seager. I think he would fill shortstop quite nicely in New York. But like you said, they've got their pick of the litter coming up, and shortstop is a hole. So it would seem like a natural fit that the Yankees are going to make a big splash there.
Awesome. John Coppinger heard here each and every week with the Cardboard Memories Major League Baseball report. Shout out to John Myers in the chat room watching us on StreamYard and Facebook Live and YouTube Live as well. Sending some comments in there. He thinks the Mets should sign Bryant. He loves Starling Marte, and he said he would let Conforto walk. All right, we're going to take a quick break. On the other side, Brett Topel joins us, so keep it tuned right here to Sports Talk New York.
Do you own a business? When is the last time you actually had a visit from or even spoke with your insurance representative? Did your current insurance agency sell to another firm or maybe merge, leaving you without the attention you deserve? Prince Associates is a provider of commercial insurance nationwide and represents some of the finest insurance carriers in the industry. Prince Associates has been representing commercial clients since 1965, and we continue to grow and offer our personal services in a competitive and ever-changing market. If you want back the insurance relationship you deserve, reach out to us, 516-822-6550. That's area code 516-822-6550. And ask for Leith or Craig, or find us on the web at www.princeins.com.
And welcome back to Sports Talk New York on the 365 Sportscast Network. Mark Roseman, Mike Capice with you this Sunday evening. Joining us now is the man who is the author of 5 books, including Mount Rushmore of the New York Mets, the best players by decade to wear the orange and blue, miracle moments in New York Mets history. So you think you're a Mets fan. When Shea was home, the story of the 1975 Mets, Yankees, Giants, and Jets, and Simply the Best, the story of the 1929-1931 Philadelphia Athletics dynasty. He is the director of marketing and communications at Brooklyn's Friends School. You know him as the host of one of the top-rated baseball shows on the 365 Sportscast Network, BT Talks Baseball, heard here each and every Sunday night at 7 p.m. right here on this station. Above all, I get to call him my friend. It is a thrill to welcome him back. Of course, we're talking about the one and only Brett Topel. Welcome, Brett.
Mark, so great to be with you. Thank you so much for having me.
Always awesome to talk to you. So you know what? It's so interesting because social media has spawned so many awful things. Cats playing piano, the color of the dress, Yanni or Laurel. But on the other hand, you get these great topics like the Mount Rushmore of sports. And in 2015, Major League Baseball embraced that, and they asked voters to vote for each franchise Mount Rushmore, meaning just like the actual mountain where Mount Rushmore has, the 60-foot heads of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln, obviously considered 4 of the greatest men of our country. They asked Major League Baseball fans to pick the 4 greatest players from each franchise. You take that one step further with the Mets. Can you tell us how you adapted that idea and went further for this book?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, thank you for having me on. And Mike, great to speak to you as well. I was always fascinated by the whole Mount Rushmore idea. Just like you said, the four greatest of anything. And you can really apply it to whatever. Mount Rushmore of rock bands, of British invasion, of Mets, of pretty much anything. But the hard thing about calling the Mount Rushmore is if you only have four, it's really hard to consider everybody, right? Like the Mets have been a franchise since 1962, but that still now spans generations. And I thought it would be a kind of a neat idea if you could do a Mount Rushmore by decade, because, my father's Mount Rushmore is not necessarily the same as my Mount Rushmore. And I also thought, one of the greatest things about sports and baseball in particular is causing controversy and causing conversation. And what better conversation? I mean, I had to listen to, my grandfather was a big Brooklyn Dodgers fan, but for some reason he decided to have the argument every single time he was over my house of who was better, Joe DiMaggio or Willie Mays, with my father. And to me, those arguments, and I say arguments in quotes, air quotes, because they're discussions and they're fun discussions about sports and rivalries and that kind of thing. But I thought it would be a real fun thing to take a look at the best four players by decade, and so that's what I did.
So it's interesting because the forward of this book is by one of the most respected authorities on the New York Mets, Greg Prince, and it's a tremendous piece about Joan Payson. As there's no Mount Rushmore of owners, I thought it was a really nice touch. Can you share with some of our younger listeners who might not even know who Joan Payson is a little bit about her? And it's also interesting because after that, after I read the book and the forward, I just scrambled to see if there was an autobiography of Joan out there. And there is. Joe D'Urso wrote a book, but you can't find it anywhere. But so many of the younger Met fans have no idea who Joan Payson is. So can you tell us why it was important for you to have A, Greg Prince write the forward, and B, why he chose Joan Payson?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Not too many people know too much about Joan Payson these days. Of course, she was Joan Whitney Payson, an heiress, a female owner, sports owner, long before that was in style, to say the least. And it's funny. I'll mention in a second. I have a funny connection to that family, but that was really neither here nor there when I decided to write this book. But she was somebody who was an art collector. She was this beloved figure. When she was the owner of the Mets, and she was always kind of seen. She was never. I don't exactly know how she was when she owned the Mets, but she wasn't necessarily young. And she always had this kind of grandmotherly way about her. Her and Casey Stengel, who was the first manager, of course, of the Mets, got along famously. And there was a lot of photographs taken. She wore these big floppy hats to sit in the first few rows in the owner's box. And she was really one of those. You mentioned there's no Mount Rushmore of Mets owners, because to be honest, there is no Mount Rushmore of Mets owners. But there would also be, I feel, no Mets as we know them if it wasn't for Joan Payson, who, in the early days really took care and loved her players and loved her managers and loved her coaches. And it was really a family affair. And that's why the 62 Mets, the all-time losingest team in history, is not a team that's looked upon as a terrible team, but as this lovable team. And I think Joan Payson and certainly Casey Stengel were a big part of that. As far as Greg Prince goes, Greg Prince, in my mind, as you mentioned, is second to none when it comes to authorities on the Mets. He's written some tremendous books himself. I've had the opportunity to be on a couple of radio shows with Greg, and I've gotten to know him over the years. And I actually, along with my editor for the book, Jason Katzman, we both thought it would be a great idea to write something about Joan Payson. Now, I had a sort of a tangential relationship with Joan Payson's family because I got to know her grandson, Dan DeRelay, very well. So it was really nice to be able to share this finished piece with him. But when I was deciding for the preface, I asked Greg if he would write something about Joan, and I was humbled that he agreed. And I didn't really have an idea of which direction he would go, and was extremely, extremely happy, certainly with what we ended up with. And Greg, I mean, I literally not one word needed to be changed of Greg's writing. It is verbatim from his computer to the pages of my book. And I really think it's a great way to get that book started, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely is. Anytime a forward has you scrambling for, you're checking the internet for a full-blown book about what the forward's about, it's written well. So I think you're maybe 10 or maybe a little more years younger than I am. So the 60s don't really exist for you as far as day-to-day fandom. My points of reference start with 1966. So how do you come up with the Mount Rushmore for players you never saw play within that decade? And what were some of the criteria you used to come up with that top four?
Well, yeah, sure. I mean, I guess for good or for bad, there's not a lot of options in the 1960s for the New York Mets. And they don't really, the fact that your frame of reference starts in 1966 is just fine, because prior to, Tom Seaver getting there in 67, there was really nobody who would have ever approached a Mount Rushmore, let alone, professional status for that matter. But, I think that what ended up happening in 69 really helped shape what the Mount Rushmore of the 60s was. Seaver and Kuzmin and Cleon Jones, to me, were three gimmies or layups, if you will. I don't want to mix my sports metaphors, but Seaver certainly spanned two Mount Rushmores, as did Kuzmin for the Mets, because they were so dominant in the latter half of the 60s into the 70s. And to me, the person that had to round out the Mount Rushmore of the 60s was Ed Kranepool, because never one of the best players in the league, never really one of the best players on the team, but he was there from the very, very beginning. He got called up as a teenager in 62 and, was there all through the 60s and actually all through the 70s as well. His last year with the Mets was 79. But, he is somebody who, if there was a Mr. Met that didn't have a giant baseball head, it was just a player, then I think that probably would be Ed Kranepool. So, on longevity and just likability, and not that he was a bad player, he certainly was a good player as well. Seaver, to me, Seaver and Kuzmin and Cleon Jones were pretty much easy picks. You're right. I never saw a game in the 60s. I was born in 1970. So the earliest baseball I remember of the Mets was 78, 79, which there was not a lot of Mount Rushmores coming from that group. But certainly the late 60s, inspired most of my decision-making for the first decade.
The book is also great because it's not just a standard comparison book. It gives great stories and bios of the players that you select for each decade. And as it always, it includes the Brett Topel trademark of great research and great quotes from various sources. And I'm just wondering, you look at how the availability of source materials have changed over the course of your writing career. How has it changed the way you research and structure your books?
Well, first of all, thank you for those kind words. I appreciate any time there's a Brett Topel trademark. I'm appreciative of that, as long as it's positive. It's funny. It really has changed. I wrote the Philadelphia Athletics book, which was my first book writing on my own. I guess that came out in, I want to say, 2006. I could be wrong about that. But, in the last 15 years, you don't, and for that book, I was crawling around the basements of libraries at Temple University. There was an archive there called the Urban Archives, which, I had special gloves and microfiche and all of these things. And, that's not really the case anymore. I mean, as as somebody who's written so many great books of your own, the internet has allowed us to go back and read newspapers from, well beyond the 60s. For me, the 60s was enough, because the Mets don't go before that. But, you can read all of the New York papers, whether it's the New York Times or the Post or the Daily News or Newsday for that matter, and get, it's one thing to be able to speak to firsthand sources. And I had the luxury and the privilege of doing that with guys like Jerry Kuzmin and John Matlack and so many others at Kranepool. But, if you can find an obscure newspaper article from 1967 that hasn't been seen by anybody since 1967, then that's pretty cool. And being able to pull from that and to research. I mean, it's really, I don't know how people did it. I mean, I know how they did it. I don't know how they did it successfully in the days before the internet. But to be able to do all of this research through years and years of newspapers, at 3:00 in the morning from my kitchen is really something that's changed the way authors can research books, and it certainly makes it much more attainable to get those old materials.
Yeah, absolutely. Newspapers.com is just one of the most amazing websites ever invented, for sure. Your 60s four, as you mentioned, Kranepool, Jones, Koosman, and Seaver. So first of all, how intimidating is it to try and capture in words the essence of Tom Seaver, the value to the franchise, when so much has already been written to him, as compared to, let's say, the modern day quote unquote, franchise player Jacob deGrom?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a real good question, Mark. And I think the fact of the matter is you can't really write anything about Seaver that hasn't been written, right? Because he is probably, I don't even know if it's probably at this point, he's the most written, has been the most written about player in this franchise's history. I mean, books, magazine articles, newspaper clippings, and he was fairly accessible up until, the last several years of his life. He didn't do a lot of interviews, but he was accessible. And of course, your friend and mine, Eric Sherman, wrote a great book, which included, I think, one of the last interviews that Tom ever did. When him and Art Shamsky went out and interviewed a bunch of the 69 Mets, including Tom. I think what I try to do if I'm writing about Seaver is do it respectfully and do it in a way that is not necessarily putting him on a pedestal or on a Mount Rushmore. But, the fact of the matter is the young fans who follow Jacob deGrom every day never saw Tom Seaver pitch. It's just almost a fact at this point. I remember Tom with the Mets only when he really made his comeback in 1983. By the time he was traded in 77, I was 7 years old. I don't really remember ever seeing him pitch for the Mets before he was traded to Cincinnati. So, my memories of Seaver are from 83. Now, certainly the 83 Tom Seaver is not the Tom Seaver of the 1960s that I write about, but, he is much more than just another player in franchise history. I mean, his nickname is the franchise. If your nickname is the franchise, you're pretty special. So I don't take it for granted that these words, that anything I write about him is, I don't think I'm breaking any new ground, but I'm trying to put it in my in my wording and my perspective and my narrative, and along with, the rest of the players. And, I wasn't able to talk to Tom for this book, of course, but I did talk to Jerry Koosman about Tom for this book. And I don't think anybody was closer as far as, well, not closer as far as friends, but, Seaver and Koosman were 1 and 1A on that pitching staff, certainly for many, many years. So to be able to speak to somebody that watched Tom so closely at his craft really, gave me a lot of life in this book. And, to your point, writing about Jacob deGrom is a lot easier. I get to watch Jacob deGrom every time he pitches, and that's not even a lot of times these days, unfortunately. But it's, as much as has been written about Seaver, I think that it's still an enjoyable thing because, NBC used to have when Seinfeld was big and all those shows were big, and they ran the repeats in the summer. I remember they used to have this slogan that said, if you haven't seen it, it's new to you. So if you haven't really read about Tom Seaver, then it's new to you. And I think that young Met fans, I think Tom Seaver deserves to be written about over and over again because that's how special he was as a player.
So it's interesting because I think an argument, and you did bring this up, part of it is to get people talking and have that debate. So I thought there could have been an argument made for Frank Thomas, who had almost as many home runs in 3 seasons as Kranepool had in 8 in the 60s. Ron Hunt, who was an all-star 2 of his 4 years with the Mets. Was there ever a thought of maybe having an honorable mention in each decade? And have you gotten pushback from fans who have the book and on social media saying, how could you do this? So-and-so should be this instead of that player.
So to answer your first question about the honorable mention, I just, there are some chapters where you notice where I felt like people were kind of in between, guys like Hojo who kind of fell in between decades, or Al Leiter who fell in between decades. So I do write about players other than the players I put on the Mount Rushmore. And of course, there's also, Mount Rushmore of players that didn't work out and draft picks. But by having an honorable mention, I thought it might water down things a little bit. Your point about Frank Thomas is a good one, but if you go back and think about Mets history, there's really not much of a comparison. Maybe there is statistically between somebody like a Frank Thomas and Ed Kranepool. Ed Kranepool is associated and maybe that's because Ed Kranepool is still associated with the Mets, and maybe that's because Ed Kranepool played, for 17 or 18 seasons with the Mets, and he literally spanned decades. But I haven't gotten a lot of pushback. I mean, I think actually the one part of the pushback, the most pushback I've gotten is from the managerial chapter. People who thought I should not have picked Bobby V, but I should have picked Terry Collins. And that was something, I mean, to me, Gil Hodges and Davey Johnson were slam dunks. And who was my Casey Stengel. That's just because of, not for winning, obviously, but for who he was. But honestly, the toughest decision I had to make on this book was between Bobby V and Terry Collins, who both brought the team to a World Series. The numbers were very, very similar. And, I didn't flip a coin, but I ended up going with Bobby V. But there are plenty of people, and it was some of them on social media, some of them just came up to me and go, how can you leave Terry out? And sometimes you forget how long Terry Collins managed for the Mets, because it was, I don't want to say it was a dark period, but that was their quote unquote rebuilding period, and they were doing this and that. But the numbers are very similar. So I guess the biggest pushback was that, and I also had people thinking that Lee Mazzilli was my all-time favorite player of the 70s, but he was not in the Mount Rushmore on the 70s. But people have pushed back a little bit about him as well.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the managers, because that had me thinking, listen, I understand why Casey's in there, but there was also that interesting, and for all the grief we've given Terry Collins over the years, you take a look at what he was able to accomplish. Does he belong there? But another guy who's totally overlooked and actually got me thinking, I actually posted about it, is Willie Randolph. Willie Randolph he's the forgotten guy. He's the number 2 all-time, percentage-wise manager for the New York Mets, and no one even talks about him ever. So, just some of the things that you start thinking about when you read this great book. The funny thing is also, when you look at the Mets by decade, you'll find it very interesting, because they've always had that one great team: 69, 73, 86, 99, 2000, 2015, maybe some overlap in the 80s with 86 and 88, and in 2006 as well as 2000. But for the most part, they basically only had one really good team in each decade. And the best 4 of every guy that you've had in the 60s, 70s, and 80s all had postseason experience. The first one out of the 16 not to have any postseason experience was Todd Hundley, and then the remaining 8 all have postseason experience. How much did that factor into guys that made Mount Rushmore?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's funny you say that, because that was not by design, certainly. And Todd Hundley was one of, I struggled a little bit whether Todd Hundley was going to get in there. And before I decided to put Todd Hundley in there, I actually did some interviews about Todd Hundley. I spoke to Mackie Sasser about Todd Hundley, and they were on the catching squad together. And it kind of convinced me that Todd Hundley, speaking to him and some other people, that Todd Hundley belonged there. Of course, he had that one unbelievable season with the home run record. He was a tough catcher. I think he was a hard-nosed player. I don't think I certainly did not consciously pick people who made the postseason for the Mets. But as you said, the Mets didn't have a lot of success throughout the decades. So the fact that the 86, all 4 of the 80s Mount Rushmore come from the 86 Mets. Well, that's not by accident. If you look at the rosters of the 80, 81, 82 Mets, nobody was coming off of going on to a Mount Rushmore from those teams, whether it was Claudel Washington or, Alex Trevino or Frank Tavares. I mean, the Mets of those years, I don't have to tell you, from like 77 to 83, it was a putrid group. So there's not a lot of Mount Rushmore type talent. So the fact that a lot of most of the Mount Rushmore players ended up being postseason is a complete, I think, derivative of the fact that, like you said, there was really only 1 or 2 teams per decade that put it together for the Mets, and those teams put it together because they had really good players.
So you dip your toe in the water for the 2020s, and I thought it was a very neat touch as you bridge generations by including Alyssa Rose in that chapter. You mentioned DeGrom, and obviously That's a huge question mark because we don't know his health. Conforto might not even be here when the season starts. If I was a betting man, I'd say Lindor, Alonso, or probably locks. If we re-sign Baez, he'd be my third. Healthy Jake rounds that out. But maybe it's a guy like Nimmo or Batty or Ronnie Mauricio or Francisco Alvarez. That's the fun part. If you go back and look at Met yearbooks over the years and you look at the on-the-farm guys, the next great ones, it's never the ones you think are going to be the guys that end up. Like, we would have never thought Jacob deGrom would be the guy over Matt Harvey. It was always like the guys like Leroy Stanton, Mike Vail, Dave Schnecks, that were going to be the guy. So it's so cool. It's such a great book. We mentioned in the open, this is your 5th book, 4 of which have been Met-centric. You're cementing your place as one of the keepers of Met history. What is it about this franchise that speaks to you, and where did that passion come from?
So, I mean, the passion question is easy. That came from my parents. I mean, my parents were both big Met fans. My dad is was a New York Giant fan, a Willie Mays fan. He was the one arguing for Mays in those arguments with my grandfather. And I think that I actually took that passion and raised it up a notch. I think, I was always the remote throwing guy who was, if the Mets lost a tough game, the remote was going flying across the room. My dad is much more calm than I am, although equally frustrated. But the passion for sports and for baseball and for the Mets certainly came from there. And, I think that over the years, my wife once said to me, well, I don't understand why you root for this team. They always lose. And, I like to say it's really easy to be a Yankee fan, although I say that in jest, because, there was plenty of years where the Yankees were not good at all when the Mets were really good in the 80s. And, I think that I appreciate you saying that I'm cementing my place in Mets history. I write about it because I love it. And I write about, I think you can only really write about what you're passionate about. And now I'll be honest, I did not think I'd write this many books on the Mets, and dare I say another along the way, but it's coming along the way, as you know. But I mean, I think that it's one of those things that I joke about it at this point. I'm like, well, if they keep asking me to write them, I'll keep writing them. But like, how many books can one person write about the Mets? And just when you think everything is written about a team, there's always something else to say, and there's always a different way to say it. I love doing it. They're all labors of love. I'm not putting any extensions on my house off the royalties. In fact, if I could fix a leak with one of them, I'll be happy. But it's really not the point. I love to write. I love baseball. I love the Mets, and it's been a happy marriage of all those 3 things. And there are certainly worse things than writing about what you love.
It's interesting. While I was reading this, I'm saying to myself, how has Brett never done Met Fantasy Camp? And I'm thinking maybe Brett and I should go down to Met Fantasy Camp next year.
All right. Well, listen, that I would love to do Mets Fantasy Camp, but you have to understand, just because I can write books about the Mets doesn't mean I'm going to do anything if I put a Mets uniform on. I can only hurt any reputation I've built, I think, by stepping on that field.
I've been to Met Fantasy Camp. Don't worry about that. We'll talk about that next week in studio. Who do you have on your show tonight?
Well, here's the thing, Mark. You built up my show. You said how great it was. But I'm doing a best of show tonight because I was so excited about this interview that I didn't want to have to think about my own show. So next week I'll have a fresh show and I'll surprise the audience with a guest. But tonight it's just going to be a repeat. So what they can do tonight is watch a little football if they don't want to, or put me on in the background and listen to a best of. And,
well, you know what? Then they can watch Dexter. They can watch Curb Your Enthusiasm. Lots of good stuff on tonight as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, Brett. We'll see you next week. Brett Topel, author of the great new book, Mount Rushmore of the New York Mets, the best players by decade to wear the orange and blue. And, of course, the host of BT Talks Baseball every Sunday night at 7 p.m. on the 365 Sportscast Network. Quick break, and Russ Cohn and the NHL Report right after this.
The Phoenix Tube Company Incorporated is among the country's leading manufacturers of structural ornamental stainless steel tubing, rectangles, squares, and processed flat bars. The company takes pride in its everyday commitment to quality and customer service. The philosophy of the company has been and continues to be to support the growth of the stainless tube market through distribution and service centers throughout the country. Ornamental and structural stainless steel tubing is used for a wide variety of aesthetic and mechanical products where superior finish and corrosion resistance are required. Some products manufactured include tubing for mirror bracket arms, boat rails and ladders, washroom grab bars, swimming pool rail products, medical equipment, automotive step bars and trimming, as well as structural framing for food processing equipment. For a quote or for more information on how the Phoenix Tube Company can meet your ornamental and structural stainless steel tubing needs, visit them on the web at phoenixtube.com or call them toll-free at 1-800-526-2124.
And welcome back to Sports Talk New York on the 365 Sportscast Network. If you just tuned in, you missed, of course, the Cardboard Memories Major League Baseball report with John Carpenter and a great half hour with Brett Topel of BT Talks Baseball, and of course the author of 5 great books and a 6th one on the way. Check him out on Amazon. Definitely pick up his books. They're all great reads. Now it's time for the NHL Report with Russ Cohen. It's sponsored by our friends over at Soho Table Hockey. AJ's not here to ask that question. You're going to have to say, what's table hockey?
What's table hockey?
What's table hockey, you say? Some of us might have grown up with the rod hockey or bubble hockey or even air hockey tables. Soho Table Hockey has embraced the nostalgia of those old tabletop games, designed a whole new board for the future, handcrafted with designer wood, state-of-the-art playing surface, unbendable rods, energy-absorbing walls. This is a game that players age 8 to 80 can enjoy. Even better, the exceptional quality and design allows the game to stand up to the intensity of tournaments, which is why Soho Table Hockey is the #1 choice of championship players throughout North America. Visit SohoTableHockey.com, learn more, start your order on a custom game, choose your wood, a center ice logo, and even the team matchups. Go ahead, drop the puck. You'll love Soho Table Hockey so much you won't be able to stop playing. All right, Russ, lots to get to. Obviously, the first thing is the last 2 games for the New York Rangers have not been very, very good at all. Some on social media saying, well, it's the Edmonton Oilers. Listen, you know what? You blow a 4-1 lead. I don't care if it's the Edmonton Oilers or the Dynasty Islanders. That's not a good look. 6 games in a row, 30 or more shots. You have the coach who's already bristling at the press, and he's got a winning record. Again, listen, and people have listened to this show for a long time know that I'm a very big David Quinn, JD, and Jeff Gorton supporters. So maybe that colors the way I look at this team. But there is something inherently wrong with this team, even though they have a winning record. Would you agree with that assessment or not?
Yeah, I think there's some problems. I think that I had mentioned early on that Gerard Gallant had basically taken a job that is more pressure than he's ever faced in his career. And when you face the kind of pressure that you do in New York, a lot of little things can irritate you. I thought the question about Lafreniere's minutes was fine. I asked the same question to Barry Melrose when he was doing that to Steven Stamkos. And the answer was not a good answer. It was just like, come on, what are you talking? It's like, you can't, you have to expect that kind of criticism when you're putting a talented player like that on the 4th line and you get beat 6-5. So totally justified. Having a guy like Patrick Nemeth out there didn't look good.
Or Jared Tenorti.
Or Tenorti. I mean, they can't move. And
right.
I think McDavid, saw that too and said, geez, I could just get to the net because these guys can't even move out there.
And on top of it, with all this talk of the team has to get tougher, Fox and Lindgren were manhandled yesterday. Every single time they had the puck, they were hammered. And there was no retaliation. There was no pushback whatsoever last night. Last night, granted, it's a second back-to-back. It's in Calgary.
Yeah.
Elevation's higher. But this was just – and you know what? It could get even uglier when they play Florida tomorrow night. And I just don't see – to me, you lose that game against Edmonton. Conventional wisdom says your next game on the road, you button down, you play tight defense, you don't try to get into a track meet with a team that's faster than you. And there was no adjustment. 37 shots against. That's not acceptable. 6 games in a row of 30 or more. They've been outshot 8 times out of their 11 games. 7 times over 30.
Yeah, it is hard to see what Gallant's angling at. And I do think that, while everybody is falling in love with Sammy Blais, you really don't get much scoring out of the bottom 6 there, and you don't get much play out of the bottom pairing. So it is going to be a problem for them.
Right. And then you take a look at the other side of town in the New York Islanders. Everyone was worried about this 13-game road trip without their number one goalie, and they've thrived. I mean, you've got Sorokin's now 3 shutouts. You know, they play Islander-style hockey, perfect road game the other day. They score the first goal in mostly every single game they play in the first period. You know, they are just – you know, and then you take a look at what Lou was able to do by trading Johnny Boychuk's contract, and now they're going to have plenty of cap room come time trade deadline where there could be some pretty good players available. What do you think of what they've been able to do so far on this 13-game road trip, which is now at I think tonight is game 9, right?
Yeah, everything's pretty much worked. You know, maybe Chara doesn't look as great, and Parisi's having a little bit of a tough transition, but he's starting to play better. So far, so good. I mean, they just had to get through this road trip. They are getting through it. There's no question in my mind they are fully capable of being in first or second place in the division when it's all said and done. So, yeah, Sorokin's really good. When are we going to see Varlamov, though?
Tonight's the night. Yep. And
so coming in cold.
Yeah, coming in cold, but he has practiced, and we'll see.
Come on, that's not the way you do it.
I agree. I totally agree. All right, and last question quickly on the Flyers. Cam Atkinson, unbelievable. Just totally rejuvenated, and that team looks totally different. What's been the major difference thus far?
Well, I mean, they put him with Derek Brassard. Brassard went up to AV and said, "Hey, we did have some chemistry at one time." Mm-hmm. When we were both together with Columbus, that's helped a lot. That has really brought Cam Atkinson alive. He was already starting to play well. That really did it. Although I got to say, there's a play worth looking up where Alex Ovechkin stoned him from the other end of the ice on a defensive play, or Atkinson would have had a breakaway. It was unbelievable for a 36-year-old. But Atkinson's made a huge difference for Philly because he scores. Even though Voracek can play, he wasn't scoring goals.
Awesome, Russ. We'll speak to you next week. Russ Cohn here each and every week with the Soho Table Hockey NHL Report. We'll take a quick break on the other side, Sunday Papers, and then we'll talk a little NFL and NBA, so keep it tuned right here.
If you're a company looking to increase your visibility, to make sure your promotional materials get packaged in the most attractive way and distributed most efficiently, then you need to call in PIMS. Whether you're launching a new product and need to assemble customized influencer packages or looking for a more efficient way to manage your inventory and collateral, PIMS involvement helps maximize the impact of your brand's performance. For more than 30 years, PIMS has been helping companies get their message out to the right people, offering personalized distribution services and full-scale inventory management solutions. PIMS works its magic on 3 continents, backed by 350,000 square feet of warehouse space. If you're looking for experience, PIMS is it. They've shipped more than 13 million packages and elevated more than 8,000 brands. Want to know more? Check them out on the web, PIMSinc.com. That's PIMSinc.com, and read testimonials from their satisfied clients. That's PIMS, the first name in marketing support.
You can read it in the Sunday papers. Read it in the Sunday papers.
And Joe Jackson's Sunday Papers here on WNEWFM. No, it's the theme song to AJ's Weird News of the Week. AJ's not here, so I had to scramble last minute. AJ had something that he had to take care of, so he told me he's not coming in today, and he wasn't going to have time for Sunday Papers. So I found this interesting story. It's kind of old, but it is really, really weird. And I showed it to Mike, and Mike had seen this also. So it appears that there are these 2 minor league baseball players. This is back in 2019. They both have the same exact name, and they're both called Brady Feigl. And they both look identical. They're both pitchers. They both had Tommy John surgery, and they're both right-handed pitchers. And they both have similar pitching, mechanics. So much so that people actually thought that they might be long-lost brothers or, one left for adoption. But it's so weird that they both have the same exact name on top of it. So Inside Edition got them together, and they actually did a DNA test. And it turns out that they're not related at all. I mean, which is, and you can't even believe it when you look at, just Google, look-alike athletes test DNA to see if they're related. It's a very, very cool story. All right, something that's not such a cool story. Let's go to the Capco NFL Report. So it's time now for the Capco NFL Report with Jay Retcher. Even though it is fall, you got to get your windows and doors ready to keep that door, the air out and those bugs out, storm doors, screen doors, all of that. You want to speak to the people over at Capco and ClearviewLongIsland.com. Give them a call at 631-440-1100. They'll give you a nice low-profile storm door or sliding screen door, and just mention that you heard about it here on Sports Talk New York, and they'll give you a free estimate. All right, so I guess the first question is Aaron Rodgers now the guy that we will now talk about the vaccine double take, or I just don't even get it. Listen, here's a guy whose reputation going into this season was great. It's now taken such a hit with him, last year, not sure if he's coming back. And now to say he's inoculated, and then to go and quote the great, scientific mind of Joe Rogan, it's just beyond. Then to, be seen at that Halloween party, not wearing a mask, totally breaking all of the protocol. How bad of a hit is this going to be on Aaron Rodgers' reputation, in all of football?
Well, I think going into the season, there was people questioning because of, how everything was with the Packers, and not many people thinking that he was actually going to be back with Green Bay. And then he comes out with that press conference in the beginning of the year, just dragging his organization through the mud and going through, almost reading the receipts of all the players that could have been brought back and they weren't. But and then the season started, and then what happens? Green Bay starts winning games. Everything is fine. And I think that's one thing we could take out of all this. In the moment, when you look at things like this, you think it's the worst thing in the world. How is he ever going to bounce back? But then at the end of the day, if they go out there and they win football games, if he's back under center next week or the week after and they pull off 4 or 5 wins again, that's all Packer fans are going to worry about, man. And it's weird. It's weird to kind of say that in the moment when it was forget about a sports story. It was a news story around the world, that interview with Pat McAfee. But winning solves a lot of this stuff, man. And if they go into the playoffs as the 1st or 2nd seed and they're destined for another long postseason run, I mean, that's going to be the main story rather than what we just heard a couple days ago.
So what was a main story last Sunday quickly changed Thursday. We had what we thought all of a sudden could be like maybe a Tom Brady type guy, a guy that no one really knew about, all of a sudden comes and did something that no quarterback ever did. The 400-plus yards, the 3 touchdown passes first game, comes out, has a great first drive on Thursday night, and has Jet fans saying, like, could this possibly be? What? And then he gets injured. But now supposedly he's going to be ready to play the next game. Where did the Jets go here? Because now all of a sudden it looks like, with their offensive coordinator, they have found they had some trick plays. It was very imaginative. The offense looked good, but all of a sudden the defense just collapsed in the last game. And that might be part and parcel of, quick turnaround, a little deflation that the quarterback that they were all looking forward to playing a big game for went down early. What are the Jets, next moves? Where do you go quarterback? Do you not rush you're a rookie and let this kid play and just see where he takes you?
Yeah, I think that's the thing. There's no reason to rush. I mean, this is a development type year for Zach Wilson and the Jets altogether. With Robert Saleh having that defensive background, it's going to take, I know fans in the NFL, especially New York fans, don't want to hear this, but it's going to take a year or two for him to get all the guys on that side of the ball so he can run the defense the way he likes it. And it's funny watching Mike White, man, because I saw him at USF in Tampa, and it's like, here goes another Tampa New York connection. I can never get away from it. And he has such a historic day. You're right. And then he gets banged up. And then Josh Johnson, who was also with Tampa Bay back in the day as well. I think it's a good problem for the Jets to have. It tells you, hey, don't rush Zach back. And I think it gives some freedom for the offense to go, all right, now we know with Mike White, you're not going to have the ability to kind of escape the pass rush. Zach Wilson does such a good job of that, of kind of evading the rush. And I think with Mike White, they had to get a little bit more creative so he didn't feel that pressure. And I think they'll use that as much as they can with Mike White. And then when Zach Wilson comes back, you go, hey, we can do some of these plays with Zach because he's definitely more athletic than Mike White. So I think it's a good problem for the Jets to have. And this is a wait and see type thing. And there's no need to rush. They know that they're not going anywhere this year.
And I think it's right. I think, your quarterback can look at some of the things that White did and understand that, you don't always have to do the great stuff. So it's very interesting. And I think that's going to be the way to go. Jet fans can also look, I think the start that Sam Darnold got off, was also putting pressure on. And now it looks like Sam has reverted to Sam. He hasn't played very well either. New York Giants, though, played well today. And back-to-back games, they lost last week, but this week they end up holding, they make that stand, strip, a sack and get the fumble. But back-to-back good games for the Giants. Is this something they can build off of and maybe make a little run? I know we've crushed Judge, we've crushed that offensive line, but they've had some pretty good games lately.
Yeah, just the thing too, Mark, is just the consistency. I remember the last game Monday night, I came back from Amalie Arena after the Lightning game. I saw the last 4.5 minutes. I don't think I saw one productive, positive play from the Giants. I'm like, I'm glad I rushed home to watch this. That's the thing with good teams. They're consistent. And unfortunately, when you look at Joe Judge's teams, you go, hey, listen, I get it. You're young, you're learning on the job. But two things that you want to see is a disciplined football team, and you want to see solid special teams. That's his forte. And if you're not good at your forte, eventually you're out of a job sooner rather than later. And that's the big thing with these Giants teams. You have a good game like you saw against the Saints a couple weeks ago, and then you have a good game, like you saw today against the Raiders. But what happens the next couple of weeks? Do they revert back to their old form, make silly mistakes, not be disciplined, or do they build on this? The jury's still out, and I know that's not the best answer for Giants fans, but unfortunately, the only thing about them that is consistent is their inconsistency.
Trevor Lawrence goes down with an injury today. Jacksonville ends up winning the game, though, 9-6. It's like so that's some game right there. But how serious is Trevor Lawrence's injury, and should the fans in Jacksonville be concerned?
I'm still waiting to hear more on the injury there. I know C.J. Beathard getting in there, but it's Jacksonville's another one of those teams you just want to build. What a weird day in the NFL. I mean, you think you have everything pegged. Everybody and their mother going in today. Dallas is a Super Bowl contender, and it took them forever to put up points against the Denver Broncos. So that's the beautiful thing. And Mark, you're a big sports fan like myself. That's the beautiful thing about sports. Just when you think you have it pegged, I know what's going to happen today, 100%. And then sports happens, and then the coin is tossed, and the kickoff happens, and then it usually goes, and it humbles everybody. So that was kind of the story in the NFL today, with a bunch of underdogs coming out on top.
Tough week for you too. Tampa's on a bye. Nothing for you to get excited about, other than your Lightning, I guess, right?
It's funny because I flew in this morning to surprise my mom on the island for her 60th birthday. So I'll be here for today and tomorrow, and then back in Tampa on Tuesday night for their game.
All right, Jay, we'll speak to you next week. Jay Retcher here each and every week with the Capco NFL Report. We're going to take a quick break. We'll round it out with the NBA and Chaim Tauber right after this.
Decolator Cohen and DeFrisco, LLP, is pleased to introduce their website, policeofficersrighttosue.com, as an educational and informative site designed to instruct members of the law enforcement community of their civil rights in line-of-duty accidents. Many law enforcement members are not aware of their rights to sue and fail to bring lawsuits within a specific time frame, thereby forfeiting their ability to seek rightful compensation against those parties that cause officers to be injured. PoliceOfficersRightToSue.com provides successful past results of line-of-duty lawsuits. These examples range from officers being provided with inadequate equipment, RMP accidents, slip and falls, and station house mishaps. If any law enforcement member has a question regarding a potential lawsuit, they can contact DCD at policeofficersrighttosue.com or at 1-800-901-1LAW. That's policeofficersrighttosue.com or 1-800-901-1LAW.
And welcome back to Sports Talk New York. Mark Rosen, Mike Capice with you this Sunday evening on the 365 Sportscast Network. Make sure to keep it tuned right here, right after us. Best of BT Talks Baseball follows us, so great stuff there. Hope you've enjoyed the show thus far. Right now it's time for the NBA Report with Chaim Tauber. How you doing, Chaim?
Not bad, guys. How you doing?
Pretty good. So it's interesting, the fact that, we've talked about certain teams. We've talked about the Knicks, but one team I want to talk about a little bit to start off is the 76ers. I mean, they were just a train wreck. The way they got bounced out of the playoffs, the big man and everything that was going on in the beginning of training camp, told them to stay away. Yet they're 8-2, and they're really, other than divisional, they're 0-2 in the division. That might be something, but they've won 6 games in a row. Did you see any of this coming out of the 76ers?
Yeah, they're a top team in the East. I mean, undeniably, unquestionably, Ben Simmons isn't the reason that they are the top team. Joel Embiid is the lifeblood of that team. He's the heart and soul. He is the most dominant big man in the game. They have a lot of really good role players around him. Tobias Harris is a really solid. Role players underselling what Tobias Harris is, but Matisse Thybulle, guys who have been developing over the last couple of years, have been stepping up. There's a really good, really deep team. And in the Eastern Conference, that's certainly gotten really good out of nowhere. The Sixers are at the top of that list.
Yeah, and the Knicks, there's another thing, and AJ's the basketball guy. I watch a lot of hockey, but I have been watching a lot of basketball because when the Knicks are good, you watch basketball. And it's very interesting that, we all, saw what we thought the future of the Knicks were going to be. We thought that KD was going to sign there. They were going to get the number 1 pick. They were going to get Zion Williamson. But that didn't work out. But they got RJ Barrett. And you take a look. RJ Barrett, has been able to stay on the court where Zion hasn't been able to do that. Do you ever wonder what the Knicks franchise would look like today? Forget about KD, but let's say they got that number 1 pick and they got Zion. Where do you think they'd be this far where they are now if they had Zion instead of RJ Barrett?
That's a really interesting question. First, assuming that Zion Williamson was healthy in New York, which is something he was never really able to get in New Orleans, honestly, I don't think so. I think primarily because of the headlights, because of the spotlight, because of everything that comes with Zion Williamson and that comes with New York. I don't think he would have been allowed to grow the way that RJ Barrett did. RJ Barrett was underwhelming as a rookie. Yeah. RJ Barrett had a really nice year too. Zion Williamson had to be an all-pro out of the gate. And in New York, that suffocates players. He would have had to have been the focal point, the centerpiece, and RJ Barrett's been able to thrive away from all of that. Zion Williamson would have meant that Julius Randle never gets to be Julius Randle here in New York. I don't know what Zion Williamson would be able to survive. Coach Thibodeau, 42-minute a night, just marathon. It's a really interesting question because there are a million moving parts that don't fit the same way if Zion Williamson's here. And RJ Barrett is not. But RJ Barrett turned himself into a very solid three-point shooter, a guy who can get and finish at the rim with contact, through contact. He's a guy who can get you a bucket when you need it, and he's also competing on the defensive end. He's become a really solid complementary piece, and Zion Williamson would have never been allowed to be that. So I don't think they'd be where they are right now. I think they would have the alpha dog. I think they would have the high draft pick. I think they would have another Kristaps Porzingis-type franchise centerpiece that would sell a lot of jerseys, but I'm not sure they'd be able to build around them the way they were able to with RJ Barrett and a little less spotlight.
Lastly, before you go, right now, the Golden State Warriors sit at 7-1. Is this the best coaching job that Kerr has done since he's been there? This is just unbelievable right now.
Yeah, it might be. It's tough to determine how much of this is Coach Kerr and how much of it is Stephen Curry just decided to go be Stephen Curry. But there are scorers on that team. Andrew Wiggins can do things. Steph Curry can do things. But with no James Wiseman, Klay Thompson working his way back slowly, this team is where they are, and with the West that's as loaded as it is, it's got to be right up there. It's hard to beat all-time record-breaking paces, but I think Steve Kerr would be very happy to put this one right up there in terms of season, 1B that he's as proud of.
You got to love Gary Payton II as well on that team. It's just wild. It's a great story. All right, I'm Talbot here each and every week with the NBA Report. That kind of rounds out our show. Mike, before you go, you're a big Yankee fan. Is there a guy that you want, like one guy? It's always about, about free agency was always about putting that player under the Christmas tree. Now, because of a potential lockout, I think everything is going to be maybe for around the Thanksgiving table because I think they want to get all these moves done early. So that being said, we're a few weeks away from Thanksgiving. Who's the one free agent that you want at your Thanksgiving table to talk about?
So I have my three, actually, and they're all shortstops. So in order, I would go with Corey Seager at number 1, Carlos Correa at number 2, and Trevor Story at number 3. I think the lefty bat with Corey Seager would play awesome at Yankee Stadium, and his defense is just good enough to play.
Yeah, and I think also Yankee fans don't want like an Astro, tinge to. Yeah, I agree. I think Yankee fans will not take kindly to anyone from the Astros. So I think you're right. Seager would be a great, especially with that bat at Yankee Stadium. All right, we'll see everybody next week. Stay tuned right now for the best of BT Talks Baseball coming up next on the 365 Sportscast Network.